Before we begin, I just want to make a quick announcement that the congressional visit information will be available at the registration desk, so please pick it up after this session. Our speaker this evening has been a true friend of HOSA, Future Health Professionals, and truly sees the value of what our organization does. Can I please have everyone's attention? Thank you. Our speaker this evening has been a true friend of HOSA, Future Health Professionals, and truly sees the value of what our organization does to allow students to learn and become the best future health professionals possible. Don Boyce, today's speaker, currently serves as a member of the United States Senior Executive Service and is a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Department of Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, and is Director of the Office of Emergency Management. In this position, he oversees the federal government's planning, response, and recovery efforts for public health and emergency medical support. In previous roles, he has served in other emergency management organizations, including the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. HOSA was fortunate enough to have him at the 2016 International Conference, where he and over 20 of his colleagues served as valuable workshop presenters, judges, and exhibitors. We're also grateful for the sponsorship of the Public Health Leadership Scholars Program and for sponsoring one of the WLA industry tours of this year. He and ASPR are indeed great friends of HOSA, Future Health Professionals. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Don Boyce.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you. So I know that I was saying to the group at the table that this is probably one of the most unenviable positions that I've had for speaking. It's always usually me going before lunch, and now I'm going before you get to actually go out and do something that you want to do instead of the very long day that I understand you have had. So I'll try and be succinct, and I'll try and keep it interesting. And I'll ask only one thing in return, and that is that I'm sure that you've had a very formal day. I heard some of the things that you did today, and I heard also some of the things that you're going to do tomorrow. So I'm very comfortable in an informal setting. Actually in a suit and tie today because I had a number of meetings earlier and because I wanted to show you the respect of being as dressed as you are. And when I went to the 2016 conference that you had, I was quite impressed with not only how you looked, but how you handled yourselves. So I'm on my best behavior. And when I walked in, I asked if any of the folks from my office were here tonight, and I was told no, and they usually don't leave me on my own. So it's going to be up to you to keep me in check tonight. But I would really appreciate if you have questions to please raise your hand and ask them. I'm here to give you as much information as I can in a short period of time, but for it to be really of value, please ask. And one of the other things that I've thought long and hard about this, and you're all so committed, and it shows in everything that you do and in everything that you say and the way that you present yourselves, that I've taken a very, very long and very convoluted journey to get where I am today. And I thought one of the most respectful things that I could do for you is to share that if we have the time, so that maybe you learn some of the lessons that I've learned the hard way. It's much different for me, being the age probably or older than many of your parents, to give you advice and have you not hear it from your parents, which for the most part I'm sure you really take with a grain of salt. You're not going to see me again after this, unless I come to next year's, unless you invite me to next year's convention and meeting. But there are lessons that are really important, and over the years I've learned them, most of them the hard way. So first, I guess just to elaborate a little bit more on the very nice introduction, and thank you for that. My current position and my current titles, of which I have two, are are as the overseer of many of the things that under the ASPR umbrella of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, being the director of the Office of Emergency Management means that we're focused on the public health and medical components of every disaster that you can think of, which should be pretty voluminous, because anything that goes bad that overcomes the assets and the capability of a city, town, county, or state, and then becomes something where the state asks for federal assistance, my office is burdened with making sure that we meet whatever that need is. And sometimes that's a challenge, because the towns or cities or states don't really necessarily know what they need. And it takes a couple of days after a major impact to really get a good understanding of what the gap is, but that's too late. So what we try and do through our operations center and through the experience that all of us have in coming to positions like this is to anticipate what the need is going to be, and then get out in front of that need so that if it happens, we're already there and on the ground. So under the office, under ASPR, there are a number of different departments. There's finance and contracting, which are absolute necessities or we couldn't do what we do. And then there's the Office of Policy and Planning. And then there's BARDA. It's the Biological Advanced Research and Development Authority. And they're the scientists that really create all of the things and establish a lot of contracts that will allow ASPR, on behalf of HHS, to go out in advance of many of the biological and chemical insults that we anticipate seeing. So there are a lot of investigations now going on for Zika and Zika testing and drugs that will have impact on that disease. We were very involved in Ebola. We had people that were on the ground in countries outside of the United States, as well as domestically dealing with the potential consequences, the drugs, how to transport these people very carefully so that they don't contaminate any of the people that are handling them. And all of that wraps in under BARDA, and then it's the Office of Emergency Management. And we have 9 divisions. The divisions that really are outward facing are the PrEP division, where the Medical Reserve Corps, many of you know and are familiar with that. The state regional administrator and the regional emergency coordinators are under that banner. And then we have Fusion, which does a lot of social networking and intelligence gathering. What Fusion did for us during the Boston Marathon bombing was that they were the first to notice that there was something that was going on that was untoward. So they saw a spike in social networking. They saw a spike in questions about, can you find this runner, or have you seen this person? And then that tipped us to get into Boston in terms of communication to ask what was going on. And we, in fact, ended up deploying some assets into the city of Boston in support and in response to the bombings. So that's what the Fusion group does. And then we have a hospital preparedness program that gives a lot of money to build coalition groups so that we take competing hospitals that during business days when it's peacetime, when everything is good, but then when something bad happens, they work together to mitigate and overcome any of the obstacles. And then there's the National Disaster Medical System, which allows us under OEM to push physicians and nurses and paramedics and EMTs and public health personnel out into the field where it's a self-reliant response that will do any number of things. They can work in a rural setting where they're with their own generation, their own bathrooms, their own food, tents where they can take care of patients, or they can go into a hospital when the staff is involved, like we just saw in Louisiana, like we saw in New York during Sandy. When the staff is impacted and they need to take care of their homes, then our staff can go in and run a hospital so that they're able to do that until they get themselves stabilized and come back. And that, what is actually very interesting about the position that I'm in is that my background is primarily emergency management and EMS and fire. And I got this position um, probably because of the experience that I bring and because I was presenting in a conference where my now boss's boss attended, and I'm pretty outspoken, and I was on a tear about how we do something wrong, and we move people that are at home prior to a disaster. We take them out of their home and we put them in a shelter, and then we call it a medical shelter because the people that are using durable medical equipment like oxygen tanks or wheelchairs or ventilators or any of those things that are power dependent, we don't want to leave them in their homes, have a disaster occur, and then go back and find them in very bad critical condition because no one's around. What we do wrong is that we take them out too early and we put them in a shelter, and then we have to put medical personnel in that shelter, and then if a disaster occurs, we take and we move that individual because we want to close the shelters as quickly as we can into a hospital or a tertiary care center. And it takes months, if ever, to bring that person back to their home where they had a community that was taking care of them. And when I was talking about that, I was talking about it in a negative way, that we're doing these things wrong and that somebody needs to fix it. And about 2 or 3 weeks after that presentation, I had long forgotten about it, and I got a call in my office that said, the Assistant Secretary for Health and Human Services wants you to put in for this position. And I said, why me? And they said, well, apparently she heard you talk at a conference and she liked what you said. So put in for this job. So I was working at FEMA at the time, and I thought it was interesting because what this job does, and the reason I told that story, is that it takes all of my experience in terms of emergency management and it brings it into the very focused area of public health and medical. And I learn every single day what that really means. But with my boss and myself, when we meet each other after a disaster, and she tells me what she's frustrated with us not doing, and I tell her with I'm frustrated with what we're not doing, and then we talk about the things that we've accomplished. That's what we call the sweet spot. So if we're accomplishing her top 3 or 4 things that are public health centric, and we're accomplishing my 3 or 4 things that are emergency management centric, then between the two of those, we're finding success. And the more we work together and understand that, the more we can evolve and do things. So the example that I gave, we've worked over the last couple of years with Medicare and Medicaid because they pay for 90 to 95% of the at-home durable medical equipment. And we've now figured out with the lawyers and with all of the restrictions to be able to now access the names and addresses of all of the people across the nation that use durable medical equipment. So prior to a disaster, if a local community asks for it and signs the right waivers, we can give them a list of the individuals that are in a zip code area or in their county that they can then send people out and make sure that these folks are okay, and then keep track of them during the disaster, and if after the disaster they need to be moved, move them then. So we've reduced the amount of people that we have long-term impact on because in the past, without that information, we used to take them out in advance. Now we leave them there and track them to make sure that they're okay, and many of them can stay where they are because they have a community that kind of revolves around them that they've built for a long time that we're not ripping them away from. So I think that's a perfect example of how the two worlds that I now live in, emergency management and public health, kind of come together and make sense, certainly for me. I just want, as I transition into kind of talking to you about how I got here, I just want to really emphasize the fact that I know that this group is interested in public health and medical careers. And I have to say that I've been in many different positions, and I'll talk about some of them in a couple of minutes, but this position that I'm in and the people that I am working with now, and to a certain extent, the reason why I am so committed to this group and I believe in what you're doing is that there's a certain value and there's a certain passion for what it is they want to accomplish. So I'm working with people that, as the director of the program, I never have to ask them to do something that has value. They do it, and then they show it to me and say, hey, we've been working on this because we saw that this is a problem. And every day I'm humbled by the fact that, well, I didn't think about that, but that's a really good idea. I'm glad you worked on that. And then we move that forward. So it's a very positive environment, because when you're in a position, and I'm preaching now to the choir, when you're in a position or in a career where at the end of the day you can reflect back on the fact that you actually helped somebody, and whether that's directly by touching them and providing care, or by doing something that at the end of that process line that you start or you're a part of in the public health continuum, you make a positive impact on somebody that at some point is going to be in need. And without you doing your job, they'd be in a worse place for it. I don't know of a better position or a better career path to take. So it's a perfect segue for me to, I asked before I came in if there's a predominance of high school students or college students, because I wanted to know how far back in my career to go, because there's a really important story that I don't really talk about much unless I'm laughing at myself with others. But I'm going to share it with you, because I think if there's a message that I can deliver tonight, it actually starts exactly where I'm going to pick up where my career started when I was in high school. So I grew up in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and the schools that I went to were not the best. It was not the Brooklyn that, if anybody is in New York or has visited New York recently, it's a great place now. It was not that way when I was born, and I'm not going to tell you the year, but a long time ago, it wasn't that way. And I went to a high school that was challenging for me, and I tried my best to do my best. And I think that's one of the things that I ask of people now that work with me. If you're doing your very best, and you believe that, and I believe that, then we're good. And that's something that I hold as a standard. I hold it for myself, and I hold it for those that work with me. What happened to me in high school was that in junior and senior year, I ran track. I was not good at it, but I wanted to be in a club, so track it was. And my track coach was my guidance counselor. And in my senior year, he brought me into his office and he said, "Boyce, what do you want to be and where do you want to go?" And I this is a long time since high school, but these are pretty much words verbatim. And I said, "I want to be a doctor, and I want to go as far away from New York as I can." And he chuckled and said, "You'll never be a doctor, but go to Creighton University. We've had people go there, and they've had great success." And I looked at him like, "Why would you say that to me?" But my response was, in a very feeble voice, and I remember it, "Well, I am going to be a doctor, and yeah, I'm going to apply to Creighton University." So I did, and I got in. And my first year at Creighton was very, very hard. And I remember thinking, yeah, he said I was never going to be a doctor, and I don't understand these classes, and I don't know how to study. I wasn't taught those skills. And into my second year, the terrible revelation of the fact, and my dad was a supermarket manager, and my mom was a mom. I'm the youngest of 6. And I was signing papers because I didn't want them to pay for my college. So into my second year, I realized that I was paying a lot of money, and I was not going to be a doctor on the course that I was on, so I went back to New York. And very, very quickly, as I was leaving Omaha, Nebraska from Brooklyn, which is probably part of the problem, but anyway, it took me 2 years to get over the culture shock of being in Omaha and not in Brooklyn. But as I was on my way back, I knew that I wanted to be a paramedic. That's what I wanted to do. So I got back to Brooklyn. I re-enrolled in college because there was no way that I wasn't going to finish. I just didn't want to finish in Omaha and then end up with nothing with a 4-year degree. So I came back and I enrolled in night school, and I enrolled in a CPR and basic first aid class. And I knew that I needed to join an ambulance corps, so I joined a volunteer ambulance corps in Brooklyn. And I'll never forget, I was driving because I was working. I was doing everything at once. I was like you. I had a lot of energy. And I stopped on a roadway because I thought there was a big bag of garbage in the road, and it was a dark road. And my headlights lit up what was a body. Somebody had hit someone and kept going, and I was the next car up. And I stopped, and my headlights illuminated the person that was laying on the ground, and I had no idea what to do. And we didn't have cell phones then, so I was waiting for the next car to come so they could call for help. And I stood there, I kneeled there, and I said to myself, I'll never be in this position again, because I knew that I wanted to help. I knew that that was my calling, but I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know the skills because I wasn't in the classes yet. And I'll never forget that. So fast forward, I became an EMT, an emergency medical technician, and then quickly a paramedic. And then I rose through the ranks of EMS very, very quickly. So I became a paramedic, and then I was a neonatal paramedic, and I was on a tactical patrol unit, and we used to always beat the medical director of EMS to the good calls. I was a citywide unit, so we could go pretty much anywhere we wanted. And he asked, he said, how do you always get to the calls before me? And I said, well, we're better. So he asked me if I would become his special assistant, which I did. And what that meant was I had even a broader scope of things that I could do, and I was doing quality improvement. But the storyline, and the reason I give the details of this, is that I was in an unmarked car, and I was out in the high school area where I had graduated. And I saw my guidance counselor / track coach on the sidewalk running people through their paces. And I pulled up on the sidewalk, and I put the lights on, and I inched up like right behind him, and I put the sirens on. And he jumped, and he turned around, and I got out, and I was like, hey, how are you? And he said, Boyce, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm the special assistant to the medical director. He said, you're not a doctor, are you? And I thought, what did I ever do to this man that he was so happy that I didn't succeed in what my career choice was? I never quite understood that. And the reason that I'm telling this embarrassing story to you is that I became my own worst enemy, because he planted the seed in my head that I couldn't do something that I really wanted to do. And when it got hard for me, instead of me saying, I can definitely do this, his voice was the voice saying, you'll never be a doctor. And the reason that I'm telling this here in front of this group of people that I don't know is I don't want you to be in that position. It's hard, and it's hard work, whatever you're going to do, not to be a doctor or a nurse or whatever your career path is in public health or in medicine. Do it because it's your passion. It's your heart's passion. I work now with some of the best doctors that actually work with me. They work for me, but I don't talk that way. They work with me. And there are 3 physicians that run 3 of the divisions that I run. I have 9 divisions. And each one of them have their own story about how they couldn't get into medical school. Their grades weren't that good. One of them became a police officer and just kept trying to get in. One was going to go to law school, but then got called back, and somebody said, just try one more time to get into medical school. And he did, and he got in. And they're some of the best people that I know, but they're some of the best docs that I know. And I'm trying to just encourage you to really, until you get to the point at the quiet moments of the night or early morning, when you're sitting there saying to yourself, this is really hard, do I want to do it? If the answer comes back yes, then do it, and don't let anything get in your way. And I didn't have somebody there telling me that. So I figured out the next course of action for me, and fortunately for me, it's worked. I mean, I'm in a good position, and I really love my job, but I've told both of my children, one who just started Rutgers in nursing and the other who's a junior in high school, that I've been at every major disaster in probably the last 15 years, and that's what I do. That makes me happy that I can be a responder and I can manage big events and make sense out of chaos. I like that there's something that satisfies me professionally to do that. But late at night when I'm sitting alone, I often think I'd be a good doctor, and I'm not. So don't put yourself in that position unless you're ready in your older years to sit there and say, I made a very specific decision to change what it is I wanted to do, because that stays with you for the rest of your life. So fight the fight and do what it is your heart and your mind are telling you can do. you can overcome any of the challenges. You might not have to do it the way everybody else does. You might have to do it in a non-traditional way. I did. So I became a paramedic, and then I went into the fire department. And while I was in the fire department, I went to law school at night. So when I talk about what I am, I introduce myself to people as a highly educated paramedic because I don't want to be known as a lawyer. So I'm a highly educated paramedic, and that brought a lot of value. When I was in law school, I got trained in mediation, and I use those skills every single day. I mediate every problem I'm up against, and I talk to people that are really angry, and I can bring them to resolution. When I was in the fire department, I did investigations and trials, and I would talk to people that were doing terrible things, and I would give them the opportunity. I would actually say the words, because I could never figure out a better way to say this. You really screwed up. I'm going to give you this box of rope, and I'm going to send you on your way. And you have a choice. You could either walk out and build a rope bridge and get over this mess you've created for yourself, or find the first tree, throw the rope around the tree, and hang yourself. Either way, if you screw up, you're coming back to me. I'm not going to lose a blink of sleep because this is on you now. And that's what I'm telling you. This is on you. Your destiny is completely in your hands. Make something really good of it, but feel good about it. And that's, when I took this job, I walked in, and everybody was miserable. They were working really hard, but no one was laughing. And I thought, oh my God, what a terrible mistake I made. What am I doing here? Because who wants to be in that environment? Now, and some of you have come and visited and have sat through some of the discussions in the Office of Emergency Management. There's a lightheartedness. The job that we do is very serious, and it's on the dark side. We do preparedness and planning for terrible things that hopefully we will never see come to fruition. But if they do, somebody's got to have thought of them and prepared plans so that we could figure out what we're going to do out of the box instead of trying to meet on the day of a very bad incident and say, oh, what are we going to do now? You can't think lucidly when you're under that kind of pressure. So that's the job that we do, but it doesn't mean that you can't enjoy it and have fun. And we don't get through one meeting without somebody giving somebody else a hard time, but that's a very healthy atmosphere, I think, instead of just being in your own little box, doing your own little job, and not coordinating or communicating with everybody else. So I want to, there are two final things that I really want to talk about. How am I doing with time? Yeah? So, I'm doing good. I'll tell you when to sit down. So, and I said, yeah, okay, good, I'll keep going. I have no idea what doing good means. All right, so communication for me, all of my career has been extraordinarily important. As a paramedic, I learned how to talk to patients and get a good history from them and understand what was going on and then understand the whys. And I would take blood pressures and I would touch somebody and be able to tell in very short order as I was talking to them before I took their pulse and blood pressure if they were doing okay or not. And I've watched clinicians as of late, and everybody is focused on what nobody is using tonight, which is really, really impressive, but everybody's focused on technology. And you can't treat a patient by looking at technology. You can understand what their body is telling you, but you can't understand what they're telling you. And communication is the essential ingredient that we don't really know too well how to do anymore because, and I live it with my own family. My kids would rather text than talk to me. And I get it, but in my world, when I'm living here and they're in Brooklyn, I want to talk. I want to see their face. So fortunately, technology lets you FaceTime, and they can't get away from me that easy. But it's all about communication, really. And there's a couple of reasons why I'll tell you that. So as a paramedic, and this is how things go full circle. When I was a paramedic, I worked with another medic he was a Navy corpsman. He had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, and he was working on another unit. And it was a relatively quiet night. A call came over for a jumper up, where in EMS logo, that that meant that someone was either hanging on a building or on a rooftop about to jump. And in fact, when we pulled up, this guy was, you could see part of his body hanging off of the fire escape. So I pulled up with my partner, he pulled up with his. I said, we'll go up to the roof and come down, you come up through the fire escape. And he was like, okay, good. So we all grabbed our bags. I went up to the roof with my partner. We met almost exactly at the same time where the patient was. The story was, this guy was trying to walk into an apartment through the window to rob the apartment. And there was an elderly man that, when he came home from Korea, brought his rifle with him. How he did it, I don't know. But he reached into the closet, took the rifle out, put a round in the chamber, and shot the guy back out the window. And when the guy went out the window, his leg got wrapped around the railing of the fire escape stair, and his body landed on the stairs, and his hands and head were over the street. So I looked at the guy's name. I can say his name now. For the longest time when I was telling the story, I couldn't because I didn't want to implicate him, but he unfortunately passed away in a mountain climbing accident a couple of years ago. So I looked at Art, and he said, what do you want to do? And he said, there's only one way. And I said, right. And as soon as I said right, he took the guy's foot and he broke his leg and hip, and he pushed him through the railing. And I went, just like you, I went, and he looked at me and he said, oh, that's not what you meant? And I said, no, it's not what I meant. But the guy was on the ground now, and we took care of his gunshot wound to his chest and got him to the hospital. In my mind, we were going to call the police. The emergency service unit was going to come, cut the railing. We were going to put a collar on his neck and put him on a longboard. It would have taken probably 10 minutes or so, and he got to the hospital 15 minutes faster by Art breaking his kneecap and dislocating his hip. But the point of the story was, I was sure that we knew exactly what we were talking about. I was certain of it. And I've reflected on that since, because I can have some of the best people that I know in a room, and we'll come up with a plan, and somebody inevitably will say, good, we're all on the same page. And then I stop everybody and say, what are you going to do? And it only takes the first person to say, oh, I'm going to do this. And everybody else is like, why are you going to do that? That's stupid. We were just all on the same page. How does that happen? It's because you make the determination that you think you know what everybody else is talking about, but you don't. So if you ask one more question or offer one more statement and actually communicate, you get so much further down the road. So I was in Vermont during Hurricane Irene, and it's actually the good and the bad of communication. So my boss, I was at FEMA at the time, and the administrator called me on the phone, and I was managing 4 different states, all with significant impact. And I was in Massachusetts, but I was getting on a plane, on a very small little plane that was right outside, and it's the Civilian Air Patrol. I had never even known what that was, but it's all of these volunteers that fly people during disasters to where they have to go. So he ended up saying, push all of our assets into Vermont. And I said, the state director said, if we put anything more in Vermont, they're going to kick all of the FEMA people out. And he said, I don't care what he said. I'm telling you that this is what I want you to do. And I said, I'm not doing that. He said, if it fails, it's on you. I said, I understand that, and I hung up. And my deputy said, I don't think he was finished talking yet. And I said, well, I think he was. And the phone rang again, and I picked it up, and clearly he wasn't finished talking to me yet. But I was so tired. I had been awake for like 2 days, and I knew what he was saying to me. I already owned all of the burden of responsibility. So I said, yes, I got it, and I hung up. And my deputy said, it's been really nice working with you. And that was that. I was in the plane. I went to Vermont. And as I was standing in the operations center, I heard somebody right next to me, like right where that table is, pick up a phone and say, "I've told you before we don't have Blackhawks," and they hung up the phone. And that happened twice more when I was talking to the state director right here. And I walked over and I said, "What are they asking for?" And he said, "They want a Black Hawk helicopter." I said, "No, what are they asking for it for?" And he said, "I don't know. We don't have Black Hawks." I said, "Do me a favor. If they call back again, ask them what they want it for." And he said, "Sure." And he was sure that they weren't going to call back. And I continued my conversation. The phone rang, and I turned around and just looked at him. And he picked up, and he said, "We still don't have Black Hawks." And then he stared at me, and he said, "What do you need the helicopter for?" And they said, "We need to do an aerial reconnaissance of this area that's cut off." And he said, though I'm sure it still to this day burns, he said, "Yeah, we have helicopters, we just don't have Black Hawks." And I looked at him and tried not to smile, but I had the biggest smile on my face because how crazy is that? But everybody gets so linear in their focus and thought that he didn't even think, because he was tired too, and he thought that they were talking his language to say, "What do you need?" Instead of, "I need a Black Hawk. I don't have a Black Hawk. No, you can't have it. I need a Black Hawk. It's a helicopter. I have many other different kinds of helicopters. Do you only need a Black Hawk?" "No, I can take any helicopter," and you're on to success, right? It's just another example of you got to communicate. So I told the first part of the story. The second part is my boss showed up in Vermont the very next day. And I went to the airport to meet him, and he walked off of a Coast Guard plane, and he flew out of D.C. And when he got off the plane, I extended my hand, and he shook it. And I looked at him, and I thought, is he going to say that I'm fired? Is he going to say hello? Or is he not going to say anything at all? And it was the third. He didn't say anything. And he walked past me, and somebody took a picture as I was shaking his hand and gave it to me long after. As I was leaving FEMA, they gave me the picture. And I keep that picture because I set that up because I mishandled that communication about as badly as I could. And the only reason that I kept my job and wasn't fired is that the people that were working with me knew where he was going to be landing, and they made sure that water and food were in those areas first, so that when the administrator and the governor and all of the congressional folks showed up, people you're going to be seeing tomorrow, they had assets that were there that if they weren't would have been my fault. And again, it's about not only what you say, but how you say it, and the intent behind your words, and how open you are to receiving the message. So it's a very, very long-winded story for just me saying just communication is really important, but it tracks into every part of our lives. It tracks into when you're tired and your boyfriend or girlfriend is saying, "Why are you so short with me?" That answer can mean that you're going to have a good time with that person for weeks or months to come, or a really hard time with that person. And then when it's no longer your boyfriend or girlfriend, but it's your husband or wife, or your boss, or your coworker, or your patient, or somebody that's days, are just as bad as yours, just remember that it's the way that you present yourself and the things that you say that matter the most. And that's how people remember you. So please keep that in mind. In closing, and then I would ask if there's any questions, but I just this weekend had the opportunity to sit with my son, and we watched two things. And I'm not a critic, and I rarely watch TV, let alone movies. But there's one movie that I watched. I actually watched it with him for the first time, but it was the fourth time that I watched the movie. And the first one that we watched was a documentary that somebody had given us, and it was about Dr. William Halsted. And what was interesting about that is that it started us talking about the whole field of medicine and what it was like then. And Halsted has been credited with a lot of things, many things, disinfectants, surgery, multiple different kinds of surgeries. He was really a visionary, and is somebody that if you're into that kind of thing and the history of medicine, that's somebody you should think about looking up. But the movie that I watched with him, and the one that has meaning to me, is Something the Lord Made. And I don't know if anybody has seen that movie, but I think it's extraordinary. And to sit there and watch it with my son, and then have a conversation after that was something that was special to me. But listening to his words about the movie, not just because he wanted to make points with me, because that's not the relationship we have, certainly. I just wanted to not be in front of you without giving you the opportunity to look at that while you still have maybe some time to do that. And we found it's an HBO movie, so we found it on HBO, and it's about a technician. And I guess the reason why I thought of it as I was coming here today is that Vivian Thomas was a carpenter, and he was an African American man who lost his job as a carpenter and then got a job doing laboratory work, and partnered with Dr. Alfred Blaylock. And the two of them, it goes through kind of how they recognize each other for the skills that they have, and how as people they evolve to see each other differently, and the strife and the difficulty that this man, who was an extraordinarily gifted person in terms of his hands and what he was able to make in terms of instruments, it allowed me to talk to my son Luke about biomedical engineering and all of the things that, other than what people talk about all the time, doctor, are you going to be a doctor or a nurse? Well, what about the 100 other things that you can do in the allied health profession that really have something of meaning to everybody? And my son is very gifted. He can make things, and that's what this guy did. And what they're credited with was the first. I don't know if anybody's heard of blue babies, but it's when the heart is malformed, and Vivian Thomas made the instruments so small because it was the first open heart surgery of its kind ever across the globe, and he was making these things in a lab. So it was inspiring. It's always been inspiring to me, and I believe it was to him. But I think the message of that story is what I've been trying to tell you through my presentation here tonight. And it's not necessarily who you are or what you look like. It's what you want to do with your life and the meaning that your life can give to others, and the value of what you can bring to many. So that's my humbling story. That's my humbling message. And I'm more than happy to take any questions you have. I just found out we have 10 minutes left, or you can get on with your evening. So any questions at all about anything? All right.
Thank you so much, Mr. Boyce, for your inspiring words. Just one more time, can we give him a round of applause? He was amazing tonight. At this time, I'd like to remind you all that you can pick up your congressional packets at the registration desk immediately following the dismissal of this session. Tomorrow we will begin breakfast at 7:30 in the morning, and you must be on the buses by 8:15 in your official HOSA uniform, ready to go to the Hill. So once again, 7:30 in the morning is breakfast, and at 8:15 you must be on the buses in your official uniform, ready to go to the Hill. At this time, you are going to be dismissed for your team time with your own team. So thank you all so much for being here, and have a great night. Yeah.